So we're going to dive right into today's Motivation Monday. Welcome, everybody. Today is November 26th. Again, it's the Monday after Thanksgiving. I hope everybody had an amazing time over the last 3 or 4 days. If you are new, or if this is your first time joining us, each Monday, what we like to do is we really like to go through about a 15 to 25 minute or so meeting and really kind of just get everybody pumped up for the week. And what we're going to really do today is we're going to really quickly touch on a tip of the week, and we're going to go through some of the trends in sales leaders. And then what the main thing that we like to do each Monday is we do like to jump into a quick sales technique. And the sales techniques are either to one, brush up on maybe some skills that you haven't thought about in a while, or maybe even two, just, put something new out there. Once 2019 hits, we're actually going to do a little bit of changes. We're going to try and get some updated sales techniques out there and really kind of change the format a little bit as well to kind of pique your interest and see if we can just kind of change things around. It's a new year. It'll be a new time to try some new things. So we're really excited for some of these upcoming changes. So look forward to those as the next few weeks unfold and then the 2019 season rolls out. So what today's tip of the week is going to entail is I want to keep letting you know that I want to remind you to remember to always keep your eyes on the sales incentive page on AHCP Sales's actual incentive page itself. So every week this page is updated, especially if there's any sort of changes or any sort of new incentives that are actually coming out there. For example, the last couple of weeks I've been going over the fact that there's about 15 or 16 ongoing sales incentives right now. A lot of them are out there. So you just want to kind of keep your eye on it. For example, we've got Humana, UHC, United Health. There's about 15 or 16 out there to go ahead and keep your eyes on as far as anything from weekly to monthly, cash bonuses and incentives as far as trips are concerned. So go ahead and keep your eye on those. And then real quickly, wanted to also remind you there was an email that came out over the weekend and maybe even this morning as well as it came out to always remember about NatGen's line of supplemental products. Those supplements are there to help fill those gaps when you're selling those ACA plan coverages. So make sure that you get that in there and ensure that if there is sort of a gap in there, you can get those subs in and make sure that they're added to the portfolio as far as anything else that needs to coverage in that. So you can always look at that. That email came out actually this morning, so go ahead and keep your eye on that. The unfortunate news for today, because of the short week, unfortunately, we did not have any new sales trends or stats to give you. However, I do promise as soon as I get those this morning, I will be sending those out to everybody to let everybody know, because I do like to actually let everybody's, as far as your limited benefits, as far as your the short-term meds is concerned, I do like to single out not necessarily one, but everybody for the amazing work that they're doing over the last few weeks, especially since AEP rolled out and OEP rolled out. You guys are doing outstanding jobs. As far as even last week and the previous week, we saw increases across the board on the short term, the fixed side, and as well as the supplemental side. You guys are doing an amazing job doing your bundling, so keep that going. And even with last week, for example, with our limited benefit leaders, we had Kent, Josh, and Maxwell. A couple of those names that are on there for the first time. I'm very, very proud to see some good names up there for the first time as well. So good shout outs to everybody. Even if your name doesn't get on the board, y'all are doing an amazing job. Again, on the short term side, these are the names from the prior weeks, but again, it's a couple new names here in the short term side as far as last week's names were concerned. So that's really, really motivating to me personally to see those up there. I like to actually see everybody get a chance to see not necessarily their name on the board, but just even a personal shout out in that aspect. So I will be reaching out to everybody with an email a little bit shortly later today. It's to be expected. It was a really short week last week. There's definitely some changes that'll be rolled out, but I'm going to let everybody know that information as soon as I get that sent to me. Now, so what we've actually been covering over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 weeks, especially when AEP opened and OEP, now that it's opened, we've actually been, between myself and Mr. Dan G, we've been going over a lot of different tips to have an effective OEP / AEP as well at the same time. We've actually gone over tips, not necessarily to have an effective OEP, but even how to survive it, not to get sick, making sure that you maintain your own personal health, both physically and mentally. We've actually touched on some things that you can do post-enrollment to avoid those post-enrollment nightmare calls backs to ensure that, you know, you kind of have everything set up in advance to really kind of stem the tide so that you can really be prepared in advance so that those post-enrollment calls that you get are the ones that you do want. And then, of course, last week what we did is we actually went over some tips to increase your overall retention and really set some limits on that as well too. What I want to really focus on really quickly today, though, and it's going to be real quick, maybe about a 10-minute quick review on this, is we're going to kind of get a little bit back to basics on this. And one of the main things that, you know, as we discussed last week, for example, like customer retention, in my opinion, is really the lifeblood of a lot of independent agencies, even insurance agencies, for example. And, you know, above all else, retention in and of itself, and they keep those retention rates there, it takes really hard work and really intentional actions to ensure that retention is maintained. The thing that I've actually kind of seen, though, is the majority of these types of tips and topics that we've discussed over the past few weeks, you kind of take for granted those basics that are behind the scenes. And those basics are really being the soft skills that you kind of gain over the years, honing your own personal craft, whether it be in this insurance industry itself, or whether it be just, you know, in any sort of in industry in that aspect. Any of these skills can be applied even within your daily life. So what we're really going to do over the next couple of weeks is kind of revisit and, you know, and dust off these soft skill areas and see if we can add a new updated a shine to them, for example. Now, one of the biggest soft skills, and in my mind, really sometimes the most important and at the same time most overlooked skill, is the ability to effectively communicate. Now, you might just say, oh, well, I know how to effectively communicate. I know how to, you know, utilize my soft skills. I know how to utilize empathy. One of the things that I like to really kind of point out here is effective communication isn't just those necessary topics that I just mentioned. It's really communicating effectively is really a skill that's invaluable and one that I believe can always be improved. And there's lots of areas within effective communication that you just really don't kind of see. And we're going to dive into those really lesser known areas in that as well. Now, throughout your life, you know, you're going to have the opportunity to converse with many, many different individuals, and each of them, of course, with different communication styles. Really learning how to tailor your message and communicate effectively with each one of those individual styles, it's a really difficult task, but it's going to be well worth the investment to just dust off some of these things that we take for granted every day. You know, effective communication really kind of sounds like it should be instinctive in a way, but all too often, when we try to communicate with others, sometimes some things go astray. You know, we'll say one thing, the other person hears something else, and misunderstandings, like frustration sometimes, and unfortunately, from time to time, even conflicts ensue. It really can cause problems, you know, in your home, school, at work, personal, interpersonal relationships, many different areas. And then for many of us, communicating more clearly and effectively, you know, it requires relearning some important skills sometimes. So, you know, whether you're trying to improve your communication with your significant other, you know, even your kids, your direct management, your coworkers, or of course, your direct clientele, learning these skills and or, you know, brushing them off and relearning these skills can really deepen your connections with each other. And as I mentioned the other week, making those really deep connections with somebody and building that rapport from the beginning is really a key to this entire thing. Not only is it going to assist in your retention, but it's really going to also assist in those many other steps that we've learned over the past few weeks and the things that'll avoid those post OEP callbacks. And really, as long as you have taken the time up front and done your homework and done everything that's needed to up front, that's actually all that's really needed. So what is effective communication? So one of the things that I like to look at here, effective communication is really just more about exchanging information with your client, right? It's about understanding them on an emotional level and having an intention after you understand that level behind the information that you're going to present to them. So, I mean, there's really multi-tiered aspect to the entire process of communicating effectively with a client over the phone, whether it be over the phone, of course, or whether it's face-to-face in person. Again, it's really about understanding the emotion and the intention behind the information you're going to give, as well as then on top of that, being able to really clearly convey that message. You need to listen in a way that really kind of gains the full meaning of what's being said, and also at the same time makes the other person feel heard and understood. So it's a multi-tiered aspect to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to really kind of focus on 5 real quick things that you can look at to really enhance your communication and make it more effective. Really just more than just the words that you use on a daily basis, the effective communication itself combines a set of, I personally think, about 4 skills. Now, a lot of these skills, which are the standard ones for things like, for example, engaged listening, nonverbal communication, even managing stress in the moment that you're speaking, and then asserting yourself in a respectful way. While these are all learned skills, communication is more effective when it becomes really kind of spontaneous rather than what I would say formulaic. And what I mean by spontaneous is kind of really taking it as the moment happens. You're understanding and identifying the situation of what's happening, you're listening, and then you are responding appropriately to that specific situation. And that's when it becomes spontaneous rather than formulaic. Everything has a formula to it, and you can follow a formula, day in and day out, A through B, and you can get to a certain point. But to make it a meaningful, deep, impactful conversation, not necessarily just leaving it as a formulaic message, you want it to be spontaneous. And that just means basically understanding and connecting on a deeper level. Like if you take, for example, if you have a person up in front of a crowd and they're reading a speech, for example, a speech that's read rarely really has the same impact as a speech that's delivered or appears to be delivered spontaneously. It takes time, of course, and it takes a lot of effort to develop these skills, but the more effort and practice that you put in, the more instinctive and effective your communication skills are going to become in time. And then that's when your instincts will take over and allows you to be more spontaneous. Now, like I said, we're going to go through about 5 real quick steps on this, but a couple things that I want to just mention before we jump into the first topic here. Some of the things that you really want to look out for when you're communicating over the phone or face-to-face are some of the barriers that you might run into. Some of those common barriers are, for example, your personal stress level and maybe emotions that might be out of control at that time. When you're personally stressed, or let's even say emotionally overwhelmed, you tend to be more likely to misread other people. And then at that same aspect, you're going to be sending confusing or even possibly off-putting signals. And these can be even nonverbal or verbal, depending upon if you're face-to-face or over the phone. These patterns can unfortunately lapse into really kind of unhealthy knee-jerk patterns of behavior that you might not even notice is happening. So what you really want to do to avoid the conflict and the misunderstanding is to really kind of learn yourself and learn how to quickly calm yourself down before continuing a conversation where you might not even realize that you're actually non-verbally communicating the fact that you're under that stress. Another roadblock that you might run into is kind of a lack of focus as well too. You can't really communicate effectively when you're multitasking. And I know that that's really a heavily laden statement. You definitely need to be multitasking in your daily life, in your work situation as it is anyhow, right? But you really can't communicate effectively when you're multitasking on different areas, like for example, you're checking your phone or you're planning what you're going to do the next day, or even that you're daydreaming that you want to go on one of the cruises. Now, that's not to say that it's not fun to daydream at times, but you really want to make sure that you are focused and present in the moment when you're communicating at that time. And then, of course, to communicate effectively, you really need to avoid those distractions and always stay focused. Now, when it's coming, like face to face, you want to, of course, make sure that you're always watching your body language. You can actually have negative or positive body language and just even slight little tics. And then you always want to make sure, of course, that you're listening, which, of course, brings us into my first point of the day, listening. So effective communication, in my opinion, the most important thing that you can really utilize in your sales bucket of skills in this aspect is to listen. You can actually close a lot higher amount of sales utilizing fewer words by listening to the conversation and then adapting the comments that are made throughout that conversation to the situation at hand. You can listen to changes in the tone. You want to actually keep an eye out for specific buzzwords that are buzzwords for resistance. And then at the same time, make sure that your attitude towards the product and the sales style matches what's actually happening at the same time. So, the first skill that we're talking about here as far as listening, it really kind of seems basic to a lot of people, and to others, it may think that it doesn't really fit in with the whole aspect of communication. But listening is the most important process in the entire communication bucket. And the main reason for that is because by listening to what's happening on the phone, in person, wherever the conversation might be happening, that is the true key to finding out how the direction is going to go. And there's so many different areas to this whole process that you could go on for an hour or two just talking about the proper way to listen, the proper way to respond. Listening is really going to help change the conversation if it's needed. It can really kind of help direct the conversation. It can help redirect the conversation back into what's going on. And it can really help guide what you're doing and tell you what your client's thinking without them really having to use words. And that's what's nice about it, is this listening is important, because if you can figure out truly what the issue is, you're going to close a lot higher sales amounts as well too, because part of listening is listening to tone, like I said, making sure that those buzzwords are found. And things like your voice inflection, you can have a higher tone when you're excited or a lower tone when not, like not as interested, for example. You want to listen for those distractions in their voice as well as them listening to it in yours. So this is really kind of a symbiotic aspect in the fact that they're also going to be reacting upon how you're responding as well too. So that's why this is one of the most key points in the entire communication aspect. Now, second point, and this is something that's kind of overlooked, and again, this is why I said that these are kind of a little bit more of a deep dive into the way communication is looked at rather than just the standard formula of effective communication. And the second part of being an effective communicator is mimicry. Really a good thing to look into doing is try and matching the prospect's tone, utilizing verbiage that they understand, having a specific attitude that matches that specific person. Looking back in my sales days, this is going all the way back to, the mid to late 90s when catalog sales were first starting out and we were doing upsells and bundling sales at that point. One of the easiest things that I found to actually increase my sales was to actually mimic the person that I was with, whether that person liked skiing or whether that person liked outdoors. Their specific attitude, if it was a little bit more stoic or if it was a little bit more sophisticated, if I matched them in a way that was genuine and I utilized the same verbiage and the tone and the same ideology, my sales closing rate skyrocketed. However, if I was completely different, if, for example, the person that I was working with at that time was really kind of just laid back and relaxed, but I was high pressure and, I was using words that were just, I thought that they were smart words. I was really kind of having an upbeat, energized tone. It would really turn the person off. And that's where the effective communication failed me at that point, where I thought that I was trying to be smart, where I thought that I was using words that would really kind of surprise, and they'd be like, oh, well, this guy really knows what he's doing. What I was really doing was completely turning them off, and I had already lost the sale before I'd even begun. So one of the most most overlooked aspects of this is to try and match. Now, this doesn't always work, but it is something that is highly effective to utilize if for some reason that you're just not really getting anywhere in that aspect. One of the next steps that you run and we'll look at is utilization of positive association. Now, positive association can mean a couple different things, but what I'm really kind of referring to here is just your attitude. People are drawn to positive people. I want to work with people and I want to be friends with people that are really just upbeat and positive. It makes me feel safer to be around them because they have confidence. They don't really ever talk negatively. They don't have negative words or phrases that they use. And this is very, very helpful in the sales world, in the fact that you will get the same response from your clients as you will yourself, that you feel when you want to be around positive individuals. So the more positive that you are during the entire conversation, they're going to be drawn to you. And that positivity, it is entirely infectious, and it's something that can just spread out and even bring in those referrals just by the pure simple fact that people are drawn to somebody. People are really drawn to somebody that's very positive and upbeat. And it's just fun to be around somebody, and they like I said, you want to work with them, and they just feel comfortable. They feel safe in the fact that you know what you're doing. They're very confident. They are very happy to give out your name to someone else as a referral, just for the pure simple fact that they know if their friend calls, they're going to get an amazing experience. So that's why positive association is one of those levels of effective communication that you wouldn't even really think about. You think of effective communication, you think, all right, making sure that you are talking in a positive tone, making sure that you're utilizing empathy as appropriate, or even sympathy as appropriate, and making sure that you're using those main common formulaic areas. That's where positive association is something that's part of the effective communication process that you don't really look into as much. That's why it's really exciting to do this sort of a little bit of a sales technique, in the aspect that it's really kind of uncommon in the territory that we're going to touch on. Now, the fourth and the second to the last area that we're going to talk about here is kind of the KISS principle. Now, not necessarily keeping it simple, but of course making sure that it's easy to understand. You really want to avoid intense insurance lingo when you're speaking with somebody. Now, of course, the only time that the insurance lingo aspect would apply to utilize it is if you're utilizing mimicry, and that person is very educated, they're very understanding of the entire insurance lingo, but you're going to allow them to lead you there. You're never going to present that information and go there first unless they have already given you that signal that says, hey, I know what I'm talking about, I understand the process, we can go ahead and utilize this and go down that path. That's definitely when it's okay to utilize that. Now, as well as keeping it simple, as you always want to be relatable. And this really kind of goes back to the positive associations. You really want to be understandable. Sometimes just making having the client repeat something back to you so that you know that they understand it. One, that's twofold. One, it is keeping it simple, but it's also making sure that you're going to avoid any sort of future issues with that specific sale once the sale closes. So that's why keeping it short and simple is one of the easiest things to kind of employ when you're utilizing effective communication. And then the very last step is something to look into at all times in any ways. You want to know whenever you're speaking with somebody when it's more appropriate to use an open-ended or a closed-ended question. What you want to make sure is that this is a very powerful tool, that when you either feel like you're not making ground with somebody, or with the client, or maybe you're close to closing the sale and you really kind of want to push it over the edge, that's when you're going to want to really make sure that you understand when it's okay and when it's not okay to use each of these open or closed-ended questions. You want to, of course, make sure that you're using open-ended when you want to pull more information, or if you want to prompt them to talk and give you more information, or utilizing closed-ended questions when you want to get to a yes. Now, open-ended questions is not necessarily making ground per se, where you want them to talk, just go on and on and on. But sometimes the trick behind open-ended questions is really asking the question and then being silent. So what you want to do is, it's not just open-ended questions where it's question after question after question. It's kind of open-ended where you're going to ask that kind of, in a way, that ambiguous question where it's going to really kind of allow them to flow with the information and be comfortable to be able to start to tell you about what they need, how they want to go about doing it, and maybe who they've talked to in the past, or what kind of information they know now. That's really when you want to open it up and allow them to talk. So that's kind of a really, really good tool to use as well at the end when you really want to get to the yes at the end of the sale. So these 5 steps, like I said, it's really quick in that aspect. Is 5 little things that you can really kind of employ just to ensure that you're communicating more effectively. Of course, you want to make sure that you're always getting back to the basics, but making sure that you're using those open and closed-ended questions, making sure that you're using positive association, sometimes even utilizing mimicry, and of course, always making sure that you're listening. Those are some of the really 4 or 5 top things that you can use to make sure that your communication is going to be entirely more effective than just the standard formulaic areas of communication in general. Now, If you do have any other questions for our training team, myself, or any of the other AHCP sales training individuals, you can reach out to us at training@ahcpsales.com, or of course, contact agency services at the number above. The one thing that I'd like to leave you with today is that to always remember that every contact we have with the customer influences whether or not they'll come back. We have to be great every time or we'll lose them. So utilizing effective communication strategies, utilizing those other strategies we've talked about over the past 3 or 4 weeks is really going to help mold your overall sales technique into something that can be really, really great. I hope everybody has an amazing week this week. Everybody get really pumped to get back on the phones and get selling this week. You all are going to have an amazing week. And like I said, when I get some of those sales stats, I will send an email out to everybody and let everybody know. I hope everybody has an outstanding rest of their week. Cheers, everybody.